This fence is the only thing standing in our way, Jack.
Is staying right where it is.
You're being completely unreasonable.
I'm protecting what's mine, Evelyn.
This was my ranch in Texas, and that fence had protected my cattle for years. Then the HOA decided it was suddenly a problem. Next door, the HOA had approved something much bigger than a neighborhood party. They were preparing a luxury wedding that would bring hundreds of guests. Evelyn Whitmore was the HOA president, and she was determined to make the wedding perfect. Unfortunately, my ranch fence didn't fit her vision. I told her the fence was staying exactly where it was. She walked away looking like she had already made another decision. Later that evening, I noticed workers near the property line. I didn't expect them to touch my fence. By the time the sun went down, sections of my fence were gone. I couldn't believe they had opened the ranch boundary right beside the wedding venue. The open boundary looked completely different under the night sky, and less than 100 yards away, the wedding preparations continued. Before sunrise, the herd followed the open path toward the unfamiliar lights. 70 Longhorns slowly moved toward the wedding grounds. The first Longhorn stepped onto the wedding lawn just before sunrise. Nobody there seemed to understand what was about to happen. Then the rest of the herd came through. 70 Longhorns had officially turned their luxury wedding into a Texas ranch morning. The guests had dressed for champagne and dancing. Instead, they were watching Longhorns walk between the tables. Evelyn's perfect wedding morning had become something completely different. She stared across the lawn as the herd spread out around the decorations. I arrived a few minutes later and saw exactly what had happened. My fence was gone, and my cattle were standing where their wedding was supposed to be. I walked straight to the boundary and examined what was left. There was no question where the opening had been created. Evelyn finally approached me. I simply asked one question: who authorized the fence to be removed? The wedding planner was trying to save the event, but there was one obvious problem. The ranch had suddenly become part of the venue. The herd wasn't attacking anyone. They were simply following the open route they had always used on the ranch. I knew panic would only make things worse, so I focused on getting the herd calmly back toward the ranch. Little by little, the herd started moving back. The wedding lawn finally began to look like a wedding lawn again. Once the herd was gone, everyone could finally see the aftermath. The biggest problem wasn't the cattle. It was the missing fence. I photographed the open boundary and the removed fence sections. The timeline was becoming very clear. By late morning, HOA representatives had arrived. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know exactly how the fence had disappeared. I explained what the fence had done for the ranch and showed them the open boundary. There was no mystery about why the cattle had reached the wedding. For the first time, Evelyn wasn't arguing with me. She was looking at the missing fence and realizing what that decision had caused. The solution was surprisingly simple: put the ranch boundary back where it belonged. By afternoon, workers were rebuilding the fence. By sunset, the fence was back where it belonged. The Longhorns were home, and the boundary was secure again. The wedding eventually continued. This time, the ranch stayed on its side of the fence, and the wedding stayed on theirs. I stood there watching the sunset over the ranch. Sometimes the best answer to a bad decision is simply letting the facts speak for themselves. The fence was restored, the cattle were home, and the wedding eventually went on. Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from.